Well, Sonic Frontiers is finally out. After 5 long years of waiting since the release of The Child Who You Tell Will Never Be Good Enough Sonic Forces, there has been a lot of discussion surrounding the very nature of Sonic as a series, and where people's priorities, tastes, and perspectives on it have shifted in that interim. Personally, Frontiers blew me away, and I don't say that lightly, but the game's been out for a bit, which means it's gone through the inevitable cycle of having people who love it, people who dislike it but, are normal about it, and people who seem to be losing their minds that people are, having fun with it for some reason. And look, I'm not going to be getting into any of the Twitter discourse surrounding the way fans were either cynical or defensive in the build-up to this game because, contrary to popular belief, I don't hate myself, but I will be getting into full spoilers for the game in this video, so if you don't want to see that stuff and somehow have mercifully avoided it until now, dodge roll away, unless you want me to shatter your mind into 1,000 little memory tokens. And unlike Sonic, I'm not nice enough to do tons of athletic feats to restore your mind. You'd be trapped, and it would be my fault. I mostly make this video not only to discuss my feelings on the game at large though, but to try to dig into the meat and potatoes of story and theme. Because that's sort of my bread and butter around here. And more specifically, I want to really pick apart what I think makes this narrative so fascinating and surprisingly resonant in ways I'm not sure I've really seen too much discussion surrounding as of yet. Not to say I'm some kind of smarty britches sentinel who understands the funny hedgehog game artistically better than any of my peers. I just figured it was valuable to put my perspective out there, because damn it, I make YouTube videos, so surely everyone cares about that. So let's buckle up and head for uncharted lands. Let's talk about Sonic Frontiers. So, after years of promising to focus on quality over quantity in the Sonic series, it seems Sega finally learned, one lesson or another. Now, let's be clear here, I actually liked Team Sonic Racing quite a bit, so I'll be the one person in the room to not shit on it when it comes up to bat, but aside from that, our game releases have been pretty bare bones for a bit. We got Mania, which was awesome, but it's been a while since that already, and they did not capitalize on its success really. We had Forces, which was like eating saltine crackers at a fancy restaurant for your meal, and then after that we got some ports. Colors Ultimate was a bad port of a game I've already lost so much interest in over the years since it came out that it frays my soul a little. And then we got Sonic Origins, which, while neat in some ways and having some really beautiful animated cutscenes, was also front-loaded with the dumbest DLC chart I've ever seen, more de nouveau bullshit on PC, and a hefty price tag for what essentially amounted to 4 widescreen Genesis ROMs. And now we have Sonic Frontiers, which I was incredibly nervous about every time I saw early material. The 4chan leaks turning out to be right was harrowing enough, but the IGN first previews that seemed to show Sonic running around in the Windows XP desktop background with random pop-in grind rails didn't have me much more enthused either. I was pretty convinced that this game was going to have the deck stacked against it, and until I saw some footage of the combat system, I honestly had very little hope. After that slow trickle of better previews and word of mouth from people who'd played it on show floors, however, the tune changed quite a bit toward the game, and though skepticism remained, largely because of previous wounds and some of the patent laziness of the new cyberspace stages being shown off, I was starting to actually feel my excitement build back up, even though I try never to let Sonic do me like that anymore. If nothing else, I thought to myself, at least this game will have been trying something different. With the reveal that there was going to be a focus on the island's mystery, and longtime Sonic comic writer Ian Flynn was being hired to write the script, I was honestly super hooked into at least that side of things. I mean, hey, I love Ian Flynn's work. The IDW Sonic run is fantastic in my eyes, and I've missed the days of Sonic where the story was allowed to take itself with some gravity without cracking shitty jokes every 2 seconds. The art direction, while a bit less colorful and cartoony than I'd tend to prefer, was clearly going for something particular rather than cribbing exclusively old stuff that's patched together with the passion of someone microwaving leftover spaghetti. If nothing else, this game would have a passion behind it, and even if the gameplay turned out kinda bad, I would feel an actual driving force and heart behind the project, because hell, Forces bored me so badly I honestly would have preferred something like 06. Sure, it was bad, but at least it was trying despite its utter failure, damn it. And that leads us to the game's release this November. Was it good or did it suck? As always with Sonic, the long answer is a bit complicated, but the short answer, for me anyway, is that it's a pretty damn fine first attempt at something like this. It has its jank, it has its problems, I'll certainly grant you that, but first and foremost, it is a cohesively fun Sonic game. And God, it has been a while since I could really earnestly say that about a game in the 3D lineup. Generations was forever ago at this point, it feels like, and I'm so ready to get out and explore a new playstyle. The open zone, as Sonic Team is calling it, certainly still needs some work, but for their first go at it, I think it's more than proved itself as a concept worth iterating upon. I'm gonna feel like a total idiot if 5 years from now they throw the baby out with the bathwater yet again like they always do, but the team seems pretty sold on this one and determined to use it in the future, so let's hope they do that and find higher highs to strike rather than nervously piddling backward because a games journalist called Sonic cringe again. This is also the first time since probably Unleashed where I actually think the series, in the games anyway, was able to touch on a serious narrative with genuinely compelling character interactions, some level of subtlety, and, whoa, actual interesting themes, which aren't just like incredibly surface level and simple, which to be clear, there's nothing wrong with. I'm just blown away that I was able to actually intellectualize about a Sonic plot for more than 5 unbroken minutes without feeling like I was stretching out a high school paper, and that's especially what made me excited to talk about it. I'm gonna briefly touch on the setup to the story and all that entails before getting on to the actual gameplay discussion, because once I finish that and actually circle back to the whole plot, we're gonna remain there the entire time. I haven't got much chance to talk about gameplay lately though, because, well, discussing a series that largely consists of reading text will do that to you. But while mechanics and such are fun to wax about for me, plenty of people are already doing that, so I'll try not to bore you with too much recap of that. There are actually 2 prologues to the game that exist as extant media though, so I guess we should briefly touch on those. Convergence is a short comic which isn't very egregious. It just sets up how Sonic, Tails, and Amy come together to visit the Starfall Islands while Eggman is busy planning something there. Divergence is a bit more important because it's a fully animated 6-minute short, directed by Tyson Hess and written by Ian Flynn as well, which is honestly beautiful. It focuses on how Knuckles gets involved in the plot, discovering some strange ruins on Angel Island that he hasn't seen before, and being warped against his will to a strange land where he's attacked by the enemies we see in Frontiers, before being trapped in a desert-looking land. This pretty much is the only explanation you get for why Knuckles is in this game, aside from him hand-waving it in a later cutscene, which, you know, I love the promotional shorts Sonic Team has been doing for these past few years, but locking a piece of the actual story behind a YouTube video seems a little questionable. Well, it's a great short though, and it just goes to show how on point the characterization will prove to be in the game itself, because, oh my god, Knuckles isn't a stupid piece of shit. You know, he's actually stern and solemn, he's hot-headed and lands himself in trouble when his temper is tested, but he has a duty, he's knowledgeable about his way of life, and he can get stuff done. It's so refreshing to see Knuckles being treated with some actual damn respect this year. Good for him. That sets us up for the beginning of the game itself, where Eggman investigates the Starfall Islands to apparently take advantage of the tech and knowledge of the ancients who were formerly its inhabitants. He tries to utilize a new AI program he made to do so, but once it gets wind of the island's defense mechanisms, it whisks Eggman to apparent safety within a strange digital dimension on the island called CYBERSPACE, which the ancients were also apparently responsible for. Sonic, Tails, and Amy are on the way, knowing that Eggman is up to trouble, but also looking into why the Chaos Emeralds have apparently begun gathering there. As they're doing so, they're sucked into a big ripply wormhole thingamajig which separates them and lands Sonic in cyberspace as well, where, hell on earth, he runs through Green Hill Zone again. Look, I know there's a story reason for it, it's his memories being reconstructed there or whatever, but please just do anything else. Do Emerald Coast or Angel Island even, for God's sake. Anyway, when he escapes, because he's Sonic and going fast is kind of his thing, he is interrogated by a mysterious voice which implores him to defeat the Titans and tear down the walls between dimensions. Confused with such vagaries but having very little to go on, Sonic heads off to investigate, try to save his friends, and defeat these so-called Titans. The friends part involves how they are now stuck between dimensions, so to speak, being like little digital ghosts. And the latter involves these brutish giant metal eldritch monsters who can crack Sonic like a little twig if he isn't full Super Saiyan. There's also the matter of Eggman's AI who's running around and trying to prevent Sonic from doing anything, while also trying to protect Eggman himself and find him a way out of cyberspace. Her name is Sage, and we'll be seeing a lot of her. Her deadpan mannerisms may bring many an anime kudere to mind, and this is, well, pretty intentional. If the giant hulking humanoid robots who scream didn't already bring Neon Genesis Evangelion to mind, you should know that Sage is voiced by Megumi Hayashibara in Japanese, who, while yes, I talked about her recently as being the voice of Danganronpa V3's Shuichi Saihara, is also the voice of the legendary Rei Ayanami of Evangelion fame. And if you'd be tempted to brush this off as a coincidence, take further insight from the fact that her English voice actor is Ryan Bartley, who recently voiced Rei in the Netflix redub of Evangelion. Yeah, they knew what they were doing. And that all gets us into the main gameplay loop of Frontiers. To save your friends, you need to do 2 things. 1, you need to get memory tokens. Memory tokens are specialized to each friend and each island, and can be found scattered around literally everywhere. The game's islands have tons of scattered platforming challenges to do where you'll usually obtain tokens for pulling them off, and they usually take very little time but are dotted all over the place between other objectives, so it's easy to get pulled in on your way to something, launch yourself through, and get pulled into another one just via natural flow state. It seems like it shouldn't really work, but it surprisingly does. Very well in my opinion, actually. The other thing you need to do is get Chaos Emeralds so you can fight each island's boss. But how do you do that? Well, to unlock them from their little vaults, you need vault keys. Where do you get vault keys? Well, you can find a few hidden around, but you're mainly going to get them from playing the boost level style mini gauntlets that are the cyberspace stages, which are generally all pretty short but have multiple objectives to complete, which will all give you keys. But wait, you can't just enter these cyberspace stages willy-nilly. You need portal gears to open them up when you find them. And how do you get portal gears? Well, you'll need to engage the enemies you find around the island in combat for those. See how the loop works now? It feels like a lot of moving parts, but frankly, once you get into the rhythm of it, it's not too bad. That's still not even everything to watch out for, though. There's also Kokos, who are like little Princess Mononoke creatures who you can bring to the Elder and Hermit Kokos, which will either increase your speed stat and ring capacity, or your strength and defense. The latter will do your upgrades all at once. What a Chad!
The former is a drooling old tombstone who chips away at the remaining precious minutes of my lifespan by forcing me to increase my speed one level at a time on this stupid menu. This bitch just wants me to have less time to spend with my loved ones before I die!
And finally, there's purple coins, which you can use at each island's designated fishing spot. It takes a bit of hunting down, but it will take you to a fishing minigame with everyone's favorite sensual superstar Big the Cat. You can use them to pay for borrowing his rod and casting a line, and you'll get tokens to use in his shop for each catch you make, with the amount depending on what you get. You can use these tokens to buy materials you need if you want to forego some of the crap you hate doing, or you can also buy these Amnesia Note-style lore messages from Dr. Eggman called Egg Memos, which, we are definitely going to be talking about later, but let's keep focused on one thing at a time. I guess we should probably go through each of these disparate gameplay elements separately to really narrow down what I think works and what doesn't. Let's start with the actual open zone itself, since it's pretty much the primary feature of this game, and more specifically, let's talk about Sonic's movement, the platforming challenges, and things of that nature. So Sonic is actually pretty fluid and fun to control in this game in my opinion, having arguably his best control scheme in 3D since the adventure games. However, that doesn't come without its hitches. While you can definitely manage some pretty crazy stuff, your handling can be a little janky, and while some of that can be adjusted to your whims in the in-game menu, which I find to be pretty ingenious, some of this just comes down to the fact that momentum is not much of a factor in the way Sonic moves here. You can drop dash and gain speed down hills, but you don't really carry any of that while jumping unless it's off a rail. Sonic will often glue his feet to the ground, so even sharp inclines won't get him up off of it. And his double jump returning from Colors and Forces still feels a bit like he's got Rock Lee training weights strapped to his noodly legs. Now, granted, I'm willing to assume this at least has something to do with the fact that the game's environment isn't really built around this style of momentum-based platforming that a lot of people want, and so it's just not what Sonic Team is tilting toward. If they did, we'd probably be looking at those controls being used to sequence break this game like crazy, and that's understandable to want to combat. At the same time, though, it can be difficult to really get into the flow state when Sonic stops on a dime the moment you let go of the control stick, no matter how fast he's blazing past things. Furthermore, while I did definitely get used to it and use it more and more to my advantage as I went on, the air boost was something of a point of contention for me at the start. It has the slightest incline to it, where you sort of arch upward in the air while using it. This led to a lot of frustrating moments dotted across the game where I'd be aiming for something like a ring in midair or a memory token, only to fly right over it like I was the world's shittiest cornhole player. Like I said though, these are all things that you can get used to pretty quickly, and can even incorporate into how you plan your movement, so it's not all bad news. What's harder to plan around is of course the absolutely atrocious level of pop-in this game has. It's certainly not game ruining, but you've probably heard this all before. Things will randomly decide to exist when they're about 2 feet in front of your face, and beyond just making split-second decisions a bit more difficult, this also just robs you of some of the immersion and cohesive design of the world you're inhabiting. It's a bit hard to place myself in Sonic's oversized shoes, to imagine what kind of adventure he's caught up in, if everything surrounding him tends to blink into existence as if it's surprised I'm there. The platforming challenges themselves, however, while seemingly sometimes a bit disjointed, are actually very fun. I find myself stringing them together and getting distracted by them rather often, and when I say that, I mean it in a good way. There have been so many occasions where I'm headed somewhere to go do something, only to peek at something interesting hovering above or around me and want to get into it to see what I can do. It's even more rewarding to find fun or interesting ways to use my moveset to slide right on into the middle of a platforming challenge, and complete it in an unorthodox manner that the game maybe didn't necessarily plan on me doing, but still allows me the wiggle room to do so nevertheless. That said, the way scripting works on these can be a little sloppy, namely when it comes to shifting to 2D perspective. Some of them have that, and while I don't necessarily dislike it, you can kind of trip ass backwards over the actual flags that shift your perspective sometimes, so you can miss it and then make platforming around in these sections either way more cumbersome or kind of impossible. This didn't happen to me often, and this latter example only happened once, but there was seriously a time where the dash panel just kept refusing to send me where it was supposed to, and I had to go die to get it to reload and work properly. Thankfully, dying in this game doesn't tend to reset much progress. It usually just plops you right back where you were, maybe sans a very recent collectible that you died on your way back from getting. Falling off cliffs is, unfortunately a bit easier than I'd prefer, especially when any curved geometry can send Sonic flying into dance mode, but this is intentionally something that you can use for actual platforming too, so it's something of a necessary evil when I'm not screwing up how I use it, or accidentally rocketing off, which happens less often. When talking about the sins of Sonic's controls, though, none more obviously show them off than the cyberspace stages. As I said before, these are like little mini boost stage-style gauntlets, which heavily crib from the past decade of main Sonic games, even sometimes down to their level layouts. There are only 4 stage aesthetics in total, and they're all crap I'm exhausted of seeing, so needless to say, these are the worst parts of the game for me, and the controls did not make this much better. While you're free to adjust Sonic's movement to some extent in the open zone, cyberspace is basically entirely set with no adjustments allowed, and the default is incredibly stiff. This combined with how many things make you outright stop, like the homing attack, which is largely used for combat or grabbing onto springs and pulleys in the game, bogs the pace right down and can even feel like you're struggling to get from platform to platform at times. This is kind of a problem when these stages are basically encouraging you to devise speedrun strats for them, though most of them are pathetically easy anyway, so there's not much difficulty in nailing the missions they provide most of the time. The red rings are laid out in plain sight and not even really hidden at all, rings are plentiful, and the times are usually incredibly generous. I hate to say this, but I actually felt like these stages did improve in quality and become a bit more fun as the game went, but they were largely either so annoying or boring to me that I wanted to do practically anything but play them. Well, at least the music banged. But we can't really talk about the music yet though, because that reminded me I need to talk about the combat. Basic combat is pretty button mashy, but in a fittingly flashy and fun to pull off way at times. The enemies aren't usually designed with no tactics in mind, and do take a bit of maneuvering to figure out at first. Once you've gotten them down though, it's usually pretty easy to keep tucked into the back of your mind, and while the skill tree helps in diversifying your attacks in terms of what hits harder and what looks cooler, you're essentially just choosing what you want your takedown to look like a lot of the time. For what it's worth though, I feel like it keeps the combat rooted well in Sonic's actual moveset, so it never feels like you're being that slowed down while doing it. It feels like you're actually fighting as Sonic, which is a very nice touch. Once I got my fill of the combat though, I mostly clocked out and began to avoid it, even when it came to the large mini-bosses, some of which were pretty fun, and some were just a total pain in my ass.
Sonic, what happened?
Squid! The Psy-Loop, which can be used to solve puzzles, also comes in handy in combat though, so that's neat. Actually, I didn't even mention the puzzles. You do these to fill out your map most of the time, and they're okay. You know, they're not usually very intrusive or anything, so I didn't hate them, but they also just weren't very stimulating, ranging from walking on squares to hitting balls through rings. This isn't exactly my idea of exciting Sonic gameplay, but for what it's worth, they're largely distraction fodder, which are completely inoffensive and take very little time at all when you actually decide to do them, which, you know, you don't have to necessarily. Obviously, the big showstoppers in terms of combat mechanics, though, are the Titan boss fights, where you play as Super Sonic. While they can be somewhat easy at times, with the last one being utterly anticlimactic, presentation does a lot for them. For one, they're not as piss easy as a lot of 3D Sonic bosses tend to be, with each easily rivaling a lot of the previous game's final bosses. They're explosive and dramatic and have incredibly fun animation, which are loud and exciting punctuations to well-timed attacks and button presses. And the music, dear God, the music. Barring one exception, all of these have vocal themes performed by the lead singer of Sleeping with Sirens, Kellen Quinn, and these tracks go absolutely nuts, introducing a uniquely screamy sound to Sonic soundtracks that gets you absolutely pumped to wreck shit, and it made me feel like I was 8 years old again while playing all of these encounters.
Only downside, of course, is that you can't freely replay these whenever you want afterwards, so you'll need to do another playthrough to get back to them. I hope they introduce some kind of boss rush DLC in the future because seriously, these fights are some of the highest highlights of the game for me. It's almost surreal the way the kineticism of the soundtrack amps up 150% for these encounters, honestly. Like, most of the time you're racing around to fairly solemn, beautiful scores that wrap the island in a sense of mystery and loss. And then you get to these encounters, and suddenly some H.R. Geiger-looking thing comes racing towards you like, "Yeah, let's get out the electric guitar, sucker!" On the complete opposite end of energy, though, you have the big fishing minigame, which is extremely chill. Perhaps a little too chill, though, as all that's really required from you to win at this is to press the A button a bunch of times. Wait, Big, no! Still, I realize that this is supposed to be a huge change of pace from the rest of the game, and it's probably engineered to be low-key for this very reason. But because of how many tokens you'll get from even the shittiest catches, this honestly does feel like you're breaking the game in half a little bit when you start to seriously go for it. I was getting so many tokens because of how many purple coins I'd saved up on the final island, that I practically didn't even have to do much of any of the cyberspace stages there on my first playthrough simply because I was tired of them and kept buying vault keys from Big. I realize that this is also kind of the point too, you know, making progression something you direct on your own and decide how you want it to go, but perhaps these little time sink areas where you can just do the world's easiest QuickTime event should not have been so easily able to get you everything you could ever want. I can't help but feel like this could have been more mechanically involved, but Sonic Team was so terrified of people hating the big fishing gameplay again that they made it as dumbed down as they possibly could so as to avoid screwing it up. You can definitely make some interesting catches though, from exotic sea life to item boxes to are those the 10 commandments? Oh, and screw these stupid slot machine sections. These will just happen at random at nighttime sometimes, and while they can rake in a lot of purple coins, which will be useful, they're just really annoying. The slot itself covers up so much real estate at the top of your screen and will not disappear no matter what you do, even during platforming sections, so you're basically just doomed to having it in the way until this night cycle stops. Furthermore, each little multicolored squishy littered around that you have to pick up to play the slots emit colored beacons which look exactly the same as the point of interest beacons you can set on your map. This means if you were headed somewhere in particular and using that beacon for guidance, but then this shit starts up, you're gonna have no idea where the hell you're going for a bit because they all look practically identical and there is nothing you can do about this but wait. I hate it. At least the hacking minigames, which you're made to play a few times, are alright. They're nothing particularly special, of course, but they play sort of similarly to Ikaruga, which, as a huge fan of treasure games, I was pretty happy to see in a way. They're not exactly the most mechanically interesting addition to the game, and I'm sure people who don't care for shmups will be less than thrilled with their inclusion, but they work out well enough to be decent time kills for me. I know it probably sounds like I have more grievances with the gameplay than I do things I like, but that's not really true. The grievances themselves all still feel relatively minor in terms of how the game plays, and are not things that crop up with enough frequency to really disrupt what I do find enjoyable and mechanically fulfilling about the core experience. Running around, traversing the land, successfully navigating bite-sized platforming challenges, and being afforded the freedom to do so in any way I want to with style, yeah, that's a pretty compelling argument for making the game the way it is, and certainly enough of one to want to see it iterated upon down the line. I'd say 90% of my time with this game was all fun, and the 10% that wasn't was still bearably interesting even at its worst. It certainly has its imperfections, but imperfections do not a terrible game make. It's just whether or not those imperfections outweigh the actual fun to be had with it, and in this case, I just don't think that's even remotely the case. The whole structure of it is pretty cleverly put together, and the few caveats I had to endure along the way are small potatoes compared to the rest of the childlike glee I'm feeling from it. Okay, I think this is probably about the time I can actually start talking about the story now. I'd like to do that, so let's do that. After all, video games, even more commercially oriented franchise games like Sonic, are pieces of art just as much as they are commodities. I don't feel fulfilled talking about a game in purely terms of how fun it is, as if that's the only measurement that determines its artistic merit or worth, because video games are typically a lot more than that too, and their developers tend to have something in mind when they try to devise what the game is communicating narratively, and believe it or not, I think Sonic Frontiers actually does this quite pointedly and effectively. So like I said before, Eggman trapped in cyberspace after trying to use the Ancient's technology, the Chaos Emeralds drawn to the island, Sonic and pals get trapped before Sonic gets out and hears a mysterious voice telling him to destroy the Titans and tear down the walls between dimensions, yada yada yada. From here, we fall into something of a rhythm, where Sonic explores, and along the way of trying to recover the Chaos Emeralds, will encounter one of his trapped friends per island. The first, on KRONOS Island, named after the youngest Titan and personification of time from Greek mythology, is of course, Amy Rose, and the way her respective arc for this game plays out, yes they actually get character arcs, will more or less give us an idea of what to expect from the way the game handles its narrative.
The narrative structure itself is actually pretty low-key, but it's peppered with tons of actual character interaction, building, and actually looking back on previous games for continuity and structure. For example, Amy is much more notably maturely depicted here. The way Sonic regards her is noticeably shifted, with their conversations being far more low-key and honest, and there definitely being a sense that they've matured alongside each other. Amy is no longer delegated to jokes about stalkerish obsession or stereotypical neuroticism. She is a deeply caring and feeling person who still values and believes in the impact of love, and clearly still feels the way she does about Sonic, but understands that she also has individual responsibilities, aspirations, and concerns that lie outside the scope of her crush. Furthermore, Sonic also admits that he's genuinely worried for her, getting a bit snippy about helping the Coco she's determined to soothe because of it. And I really like this subtle interplay between Sonic's more impatient nature and his genuine caring attitude. It injects a bit more of the bite back into his character that I think some tend to miss when he goes full shonen, but strikes a good balance by not compromising the character he still is at his heart. Speaking of the Coco, each character's narrative arc is also very well assisted by their presence. Except for this asshole, why would you make me upgrade my speed one level at a time, you bumbling relic? As these aren't just little cute mascot characters, but they tie into the overarching story about the Ancients that I briefly mentioned before. Over the course of the first island's narrative, where Sonic and Amy try to assist a Coco in finding their lost love, they become somewhat aware of what the Coco are. How do they do this? Well, they get their first hint when they deliver several children to their mother, and they all seemingly collapse in contentment, giving Amy a sense of comfort and completion when she sees them. When she goes the extra mile to reunite the lovers, she and Sonic get one of many flashbacks from cyberspace, imparting the memories and lived experiences of the Ancients themselves, letting us in on the fact that these two already reunited and were killed together when the Ancient Society was attacked by some, as of this point, unknown threat. Considering that the corresponding Coco are used like little avatars or totems that represent these Ancients in their respective flashbacks, it becomes somewhat clear that these Ancients' aimless and unfulfilled souls have in some manner been left behind in the Coco, and this sort of seems to be a cultural nod to Haniwa figures. If you're not in the loop, Haniwa were clay figures used during the Kofun period in Japan, usually to circle above a tomb. The idea is that beyond just being boundary markers for gravesite borders, the soul of the deceased would reside in the Haniwa itself, while armor and weapons that were commonly left with them would drive evil spirits away from the owner. Though the religious connotations of Haniwa have largely fallen away in modern times, their aesthetical and historical significance have remained prevalent, and have been referenced artistically in many different works. And I think the way the Coco are used as a parallel to them is obviously very deliberate. Sonic acts as something of a speedy blue ferryman who brings them some sort of long-sought peace. Tails even asks Sonic later on the third island, if it's cruel to shuffle them through facsimiles of long-lost memories when their failure already arrived centuries ago. And Sonic says that if that's what personally brings them peace, then that's what matters most. The significance may escape Sonic and his friends, who are both removed in time and culture from the Ancients, but they can still respect them enough to properly close the book for them in the way that feels right to them. This predictably gets Amy pondering about her life and the fragility of it as well. She talks about how, having seen a love that literally transcended time, she can't help but want to share those learned experiences, that love, with the world, even if she knows that it may take her away from Sonic in the process. Sonic, ever the supportive friend regardless of her endeavors, is sure to ease her frayed nerves by not only giving her room to quietly process these feelings when they first arrive, but also ensure her that he would be delighted to hear all about it when she returns, subtly making certain that she knows she always has a place beside him if she'd like to resume it. This kind of mature character writing that brims with familiarity and warmth just emphasizes the way Sonic and these characters have grown and learned from their experiences with each other. Never have I felt like the dialogue between them was so down-to-earth and emotionally evocative, while also wearing an investment and fondness for the character's personality, dynamics, and histories on its sleeve. It's true that Ian may at times get a bit trigger-happy with his references to prior Sonic games, with things like Unleashed, Riders, Shadow the You thought you got me early, huh? And even Team Sonic Racing, but this all lends to a sense of long-forgotten cohesiveness that is so refreshing to see again. No longer do these games feel as if they're trying to get away from themselves and their histories, shying away from any trace of continuity in favor of telling self-contained Saturday morning cartoon stories. Frontiers feels like serial storytelling in motion, the newest chapter of a long narrative with characters who have been through many trials and tribulations, and who acknowledge and learn from those experiences. Hell, even Eggman gets this kind of love and attention, and before we move on to Island 2, I guess this means now would be a good time to bring up the Egg Memos. The Egg Memos are audio logs candidly recorded by Eggman himself, which can be picked up in the Big Fishing minigame, which I honestly can't wrap my head around why some of these logs weren't integrated into the main cutscenes, considering their later significance, and why they appear here of all places when it seems so borderline irrelevant to the task at hand. Well, they're still a delightfully important addition to the narrative, because boy howdy does this story really start to land even more brilliantly when you pick up all of these on your first go around. I did, and when I tell you that it should practically be a requirement to play the game this way, I really mean it. First of all, let's get some of this lore stuff out of the way first. He confirms that the Ancients are the genetic predecessors of Chaos from Sonic Adventure. This should probably not be very surprising if you've seen both of them, but this little fun fact opened the floodgates for my little niche Sonic lore brain. I'll get more into why that is later, because you're gonna need more of the backstory before I can go on my little tinfoil hat game theory tangent, but look forward to it. More importantly to the purpose of the narrative itself, though, we really start to peel back into Eggman's more humanizing elements. Beyond just being able to acknowledge the impressive qualities of his enemies and make personal observations about them, he also shows something of a progressive change in attitude toward his newest creation, Sage. Sage, as I said before, is an AI that Eggman builds to help him take over the Starfall Islands and manipulate the Ancients' technology. She protectively sequesters him in cyberspace when he's nearly attacked by the island's defenses, and though she seemingly can't control the Titans, she can invoke their rage against Sonic and often stands in opposition to him and his friends for Eggman's sake. At first, Eggman seemingly shows just as little regard for her as he does any other creation he's made, but as she continually proves effective at keeping him out of harm's way, harasses Sonic in ways he finds entertaining, and even continuously runs simulations to find the most effective ways to help him, it becomes clear that Eggman is starting to form something of an attachment to her. At first, he denies this wholesale. She's just an AI, he says. He doesn't even use personable language for her, just preferring to say it. Yet gradually over the logs, we see his attitude shift as he becomes more fond of her, being keen to her potential preferences and starting to use she instead, and even commenting on how he's proud of her. This is even depressingly contextualized through a log he has about Maria of all people. Yeah, that Maria from Sonic Adventure 2. Never in my life did I think we'd get Eggman talking about his family dynamics, but here he is bearing his soul about his deceased cousin. And what does he have to say about her? That he never really knew her very well, presumably being too young to understand much about her and Gerald's situations, but felt the emptiness surrounding her loss. He remarks on how so much love was funneled towards someone who was gone when he was right there. In effect, this gives some gesture toward the pathos that defines Eggman. We don't exactly know if it's his sole motivation for his madness, but it does say a lot that someone who seems determined to plaster their visage over everything and to command the praise and attention of everyone on Earth seems to have early on felt the pangs of jealousy and bitterness that come with being caught in a situation they don't understand and being neglected while their family yearns for a past they'll never get back. To contrast this small, unresolved bit of hurt, he also reflects on how maybe, just maybe, how Sage is now could have been similar to the way Maria was at the tragically young age she lost her life at. With the way he becomes even more transparently attached to this idea of fostering her growth, and how insistent he becomes that creating a life really isn't that different from what he's doing by making an advanced AI, it becomes incredibly clear what he's doing here. He's making up for the familial bonds he never had, trying to patch over the pain of what he was never able to actualize by becoming in some manner a father. And that is a level of humanization I never thought I would see from Dr. Eggman of all people. But this is a thread we need to keep tucked into our back pockets going forward. Also Sonic fights the mass production Evangelion. Thankfully Giganto doesn't do to Amy what they did to Asuka. After finally defeating the giant he was scorned by earlier when he was literally tossed into the side of a mountain,
Step to me, bitch.
He flies onward to the second island of the game, Ares, named after the god of war who was a son of Zeus. As he's flung into the dirt, the emeralds scatter, and he remarks on how, of course, it can never be that easy. And that leads to us repeating the cycle anew with who we already saw occupying this locale before this journey began, Knuckles the Echidna. Also, we're being attacked by a sky worm. Knuckles is a character who's been, thank God, getting a lot of love this year. I already thought that the second Sonic movie did him pretty proper justice in a way that made me yearn for his pre-Flanderization days all the more, and Frontiers was also here to pick up that slack. No longer is Rad Red a bumbling moron who's so empty-headed that you'd hear ping-pong noises if you rattled his brain around. He's the same lovable guy we know from basically the adventure era. You know, he's not exactly street smart, but he's wise about a lot of things, and though he does have a temper, he's also strong and silent when need be, and has a healthy dosage of friendly rivalry with Sonic. God, this game remembers that they started off as enemies. That's something that was even starting to fall by the wayside a little bit in games like Heroes, so this is really refreshing to see. Beyond these two practically flirting with each other, it is just so charming that they snip and bicker with each other in a way that feels so fitting for them. And it never feels like either is going too far, or that they'll legitimately piss each other off while doing so. They're having fun with it. They like bickering with each other, because they also respect one another and are always pushing themselves to be better by trying to stay on top. Knuckles instantly complains when he realizes he isn't fully back to a corporeal state when Sonic rescues him, practically baiting Sonic into his following insistence that he's
working on it, okay?
Of course, playful jabs aside, Knuckles, just like everyone else, gets his moments of vulnerability here too, and they work so organically for both his character and the larger narrative itself, really. The lore of the Ancients was obviously going to tie back into Angel Island in some way. Their ties to the Chaos Emeralds all but guaranteed this from the get-go, and the way this ties into the overarching themes and Knuckles' ongoing character means that I honestly think we see him narratively at some of his strongest here. Because man, if there was one thing I was really bummed about in Adventure, it's that Knuckles honestly didn't tend to react much or take that much interest in the business of his ancestors. He mostly shrugs it off, but here he seems a lot more thoughtful about it all in a way that perfectly coalesces together with everything else to see on Ares. Though he initially voices some skepticism about whether or not the architecture and use of the emeralds points to any possible connections between the Starfall Islands and Angel Island itself, Knuckles does still find a lot of the place very familiar in ways that make sense to him. He takes up a surrogate leadership role to a group of Coco who carry the spirits of a group of combatants rallying together to try to protect their homes and erecting bunkers, bases, and walls of defense to stave off whatever threat we already saw targeting them. We do unfortunately know how this story goes though, and Knuckles sees it firsthand, when a flashback reveals that the troops were annihilated swiftly by a huge laser that seemed crushingly effective in its ability to rend their forces to nothing in a matter of moments.
Having any Operation Big Wave flashbacks there, buddy?
What really seems to drive the nail in further though is Knuckles' discovery of even more pointedly distinct structures near the bunker that look practically identical to some near his home. We even get a cute little flashback frame to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which made me beam when I saw it, despite the sobering context it's presented in. Knuckles, knowing so little about his own people even after all this time and being divorced from a time where he will ever have been able to get to know them, desperately wishes to preserve the little history he can get his hands on, and he genuinely starts to crumble a bit at the thought of losing it when attacking enemies swoop in. And this is where Sonic displays the maturity he's also plenty capable of, which makes him so admirable in my book. He immediately stops cracking jokes and assures Knuckles he won't let it come to harm under his watch. Knuckles, who has similarly been teasing Sonic this whole time, clearly reacts in a way that displays his genuine trust in the Hedgehog, forged through fire and so many do-or-die situations that they've powered through together over the years, simply thanking him with a sincerity that perfectly conveys his genuine relief. Through all of this though, Knuckles also begins to wear on his sleeve some of that emotional hardship that he's so regularly set on keeping close to his chest. The Coco's efforts ending in vain, the Ancients very clearly having their civilization brought to ruin, the same way the Echidna's own did, and having just as many vague traces of long-forgotten stories to show for it, make Knuckles ponder his own position, his life up until now. He says that it makes him remember that he's the last of his kind, that he's alone. But of course, Sonic is there to put his trademark spin on the situation. He listens carefully to Knuckles' words, but he won't let him finish that thought uncontested, clarifying that though he may be the last, he is far from alone, because he has Sonic and the rest of his friends that he's made through him. To that, Knuckles brightens, saying that he does envy Sonic's lifestyle, his ability to be so devil-may-care and go anywhere he likes, and Sonic dares him to do the same. He shoulders so many responsibilities that he very rarely allows himself the risk of exploring the world around him, only really doing so when a greater danger arises. But in this intimately familiar moment, Knuckles seems like, even if for a bit, he could be swayed into taking a chance, a risk like Sonic's many, to see the many things he's been so desperate to learn about. Once again, one of Sonic's friends charts a map ahead into the future that may pull them in different directions, but it's because of Sonic's influence that he was able to muster that strength, despite the fact that he already had so much of it. And that speaks to the mark that they have already left on this world, the one they'll continue to forge. It seems even Sage herself is starting to notice this, in fact. She recognizes Sonic's ability to make quick peace with those he's previously been at odds with, and seems more conflicted about his repeated requests to just help if he knew what was going on. Her streak of pessimism isn't quite broken yet, though. She still has to watch after Eggman, and seeing as she started asking questions like whether or not the Doctor's other creations could be likened to her siblings, it seems ever apparent that this familial affliction that he's been struck by is in no way a one-sided sensation. Sonic and his friends, by all her accounts, are still doomed, regardless of how much they live and learn. But one worm thrashing later, maybe she'll start to change her tune. We can only really find out by proceeding to the third island, Chaos Island, named itself after the personification of the primordial void. It's a shame that the story here is probably the strongest it's been yet, because man, navigating this place is kind of a slog compared to the other islands, not gonna lie. Sure, Ares had a lot of annoying dead ends due to the canyon walls and mountains and such, but the environment here, don't get me wrong, it's really cool looking aesthetically between the foggy light of the morning and the harsh glow of magma by the volcanoes, but this truly is a how the hell do I get over there kind of map.
Kinda cool to hop on a flying enemy the first time you figure out you can do it, but there are so many moments where you're left scratching your head as to how to get somewhere that filling in the map was pretty taxing for me. And I of course had to do this because I really didn't want to miss out on the excellent side story material that Chaos Island is packed with. You can probably take a preliminary guess as to why this is the case though when I tell you that obviously the friend who's in need of rescue this time is Tails. Tails is pretty much the quintessential main hero character of the series who isn't Sonic himself, and he's been getting quite a bit of love this year too, considering it's the 30th anniversary of his debut appearance. Suffice to say, considering how dirty he was done in Sonic Forces, it was going to be really important to nail his characterization and journey here, and considering the quality of the previous character arcs, I was feeling pretty optimistic about what would be on the table for him going into this section of the game. Turns out, I was absolutely right to hold such high hopes, because this bit of the story may contain some of the hardest-hitting moments in the whole narrative for me. Tails starts off his narrative throughline in this game by doing what he does most often, piecing together what he can through strict study of what's around him, and trying to put that practical knowledge to good use, even as he worries about Sonic's increasingly strained-looking condition. Through doing so, they're both able to uncover more information about the Ancients themselves, and about how this area seemed to be a military frontline, where the once peaceful people were building enormous weapons in anticipation of some incredible threat, obviously the one that even these behemoths of technology were not able to successfully stave off. More and more, it becomes pretty obvious that whatever destroyed the Ancients is freakishly powerful, and it starts to dredge up more than a few insecurities for Tails himself. This all comes to a head though, once again, through one of the Coco that Tails is trying to help. They're very obviously meant to parallel Tails himself, wearing little pilot goggles, arranging plans to follow through with a hero from their group, only to panic when preparations begin to fall through, stumbling through the traumatic memories of their hero never arriving. This gives Tails ample opportunity to reflect on his own insecurities of living in Sonic's shadow, and even gives Ian some room, writing-wise, to interrogate the inconsistencies in how this aspect of Tails is written. Tails' own independence and need to break out on his own has been touched upon his earliest Sonic adventure, and culminates in his first solo defeat of Eggman when he tries to shoot a dud missile at Station Square, then attacks it himself when it doesn't go his way. It's followed up pretty significantly by Tails holding his ground and protecting Amy against Eggman himself, first when he goes to break Sonic out of Prison Island, and then again on the arc when he thinks Sonic has just been killed in Sonic Adventure 2. It's always rubbed people a little weirdly that after these incidents, Tails would seemingly revert in other situations, content to meekly follow Sonic's footsteps or otherwise completely have his character development trashed and disrespected, like in Forces when he cowers from Chaos Zero of all things, despite the fact that he showed himself more than capable in Adventure of taking on even stronger forms of the same creature. Frontiers does not shy away from this inconvenient canon truth either, and instead uses it as a building block to explore character emotions in a way that softly tries to course correct without overstepping into outright retcon territory. And honestly, I think that's always been a pretty respectable aspect of Ian's approach to the series. Even back during his days on Archie, it would have been much easier to reboot the comic earlier before legal issues forced them to do so, especially considering the myriad of ludicrous ideas that were introduced into it by writers with slightly more questionable ideas, or a lack of respect for the material they were even working with. But still, Ian didn't do that, and went on to make many stories with the history and characters of Archie Sonic in mind, that built upon that foundation while still being able to nudge it in a better, more interesting direction. He does much the same here, having Tails reluctantly admit to Sonic that he fell apart during the war when he was captured, and this boils over into Tails really ragging on himself, thinking himself to be a burden to Sonic who relies on him far too often, far too late into his life. Sonic of course calls this for what it is though, and is quick to remind Tails of all of his previous achievements, chalking his steps back up to the process of growing up. Even when they witness the Coco fulfill itself and fall empty, Sonic is insistent on making sure that Tails knows he's proud of him for everything he's done, and continues to do. Tails responds in kind, of course, remarking that the whole experience has given him something of a newfound clarity, and made him think that after this he needs to go and see the world on his own for a while, outside of Sonic's shadow. Sonic of course has no issue with him going his own way, but still seems bittersweet about it, saying that he didn't realize Tails would grow up on him so fast. This is such a true-to-life brotherly bond, and it's such a good, fundamental understanding of these two and their dynamic, and the many steps along the way that they've taken within it. Sonic has always trusted Tails as his wingman, as his little brother, but now he's starting to see the ways in which Tails is growing up. And though he's already felt that way for a while, it cements in his mind that Tails is no longer a sidekick, but an equal, a partner.
And it turns out the audience won't be the only ones affected by this. Sage has been poking around a bit more frequently in this part of the story too, considering her growing confliction with seeing how Sonic operates on the previous island. She begins to divulge a tiny bit more information, even if not much, and though she does have a big centaur sword-looking titan attack him, she is also observing his interactions with his best buddy a bit more carefully. It's at this point that she starts to bargain with Eggman, saying that his only safe way out of cyberspace is to make yet another reluctant temporary alliance with the Blue Hedgehog, and her father-to-be does not want to hear about it. Still, despite his haughtiness, he can't help but be increasingly grateful to her when she saves his life from the threat cyberspace will turn his way. And this, combined with Sonic's persistence, seems to be forming some cracks in her mind, in the data-driven notion that they're all doomed by whatever lurks just beyond the veil here. This quite literally boils over when she sees the culmination of Sonic and Tails' friendship here. She hides behind a pillar, lamenting that before she had learned of their complexities, when she only had to see them as enemies to be defeated, things were much simpler, that she wishes she hadn't seen this family born of love, the exact kind she wishes she had. As she does so, her color flickers, she weeps, and her mind races with the few memories she has with Eggman. The melancholy music and the lack of many scenes to flash back to may make the scene's presentation seem a bit melodramatic, or worse yet, silly. But I think it's important to note that despite the short time she's been alive, it seems like Sage really does love her creator, wants to keep him safe. And I think this sentiment alone is enough to start seriously considering where she'll go from here. Considering the emphasis placed upon memory, upon history, and the ties between people until now, I think it goes without saying that this will start to pan out in ways we should really be paying attention to. Still, emotional catharsis or not, this pinball game that's mandatory to progression at the end of the island, it sucks. Don't at me. I don't care if you got lucky with it, it is tedious and annoying, and the smile on my face at seeing it for the first time faded very quickly. At least it's made up for by another insanely cool Titan fight afterward, though. This is seriously peak anime nonsense. The fluidity of Sonic's animations as he knocks its legs out from under it, then smacks it heel first into the cratered ground is legendary. My mouth was literally hanging open when he siluped the giant Buster Sword, lifted it into the air, and then cleaved the thing clean in half like he was Trunks teaching Frieza what for. God, that was so unbelievably cool. Of course, the progression doesn't seem to be taking a small toll on Sonic anymore, as pillars rise in the distance, towers that provide the final barrier between dimensions to cross. Sonic is once again faced with a final series of hurdles to his friend's safety, and though he seems willing to cross it, even Tails is starting to realize that he's got more than a bit of a limp going on at this point. The fact that his idle animation was starting to show signs of pain was concerning enough, but now it's getting even worse, and though it may cause a little bit of dissonance to see him racing along despite this, I'd say thematically it almost feels a little agonizing to imagine that despite that kind of stress, Sonic is still pushing himself so hard. We've got no time to rest on our laurels, though. We've got to move on to RHEA Island. RHEA, named after the wife of KRONOS, is kind of a unique part of this game, by which I mean that it just all kind of feels like one big long stage. Thematically, as a culmination of Sonic's corruption and exhaustion, as well as capping off the lore of the Ancients, I'd say it works pretty well, but as an island advertised like the others, it's very clearly just a segmented piece of the game that does not define itself very honestly, given its incredibly short comparative runtime. There's really not that much to say about it aesthetically, though I do like the platforming challenges present here. There's really only much room to talk about the story, and since this section is very short, the summary will be a bit sparse too. Don't worry about having a lack of things to talk about though, I'll finally be able to put on my tinfoil hat for a bit when we talk about the Ancients' lore, so hold tight. To put it succinctly, with each tower deactivated, Sonic goes through more and more excruciating pain from his corruption, and learns a bit more about the last bits of Ancients' lore that we need. The voice he's been hearing since the beginning urges him to keep going, even at the cost of his own well-being, seeming to suggest that it's the last blockage between dimensions that will allow his friends to come back from their prisons. All the while, Sage watches as he crumbles, realizing now that though he is mighty, even asking how it's possible that he can still smile despite the pain, his condition is going the way she expected it to. She no longer seems to hold any resentment towards Sonic and even respects him, but she's resigned herself to the fate she projects for him. Meanwhile, in the flashbacks, we see that the Ancients were, surprise surprise, aliens who originally fled their homeworld after it was ravaged and destroyed by the entity they had already been shown struggling against. They seemed to be in early possession of the Chaos Emeralds, thus explaining why all their technology was built around them. But though the implication seems to be that they're from space, and Sage later seems to confirm this might conflict with pre-established lore of Dark Gaia and Unleashed, right? Well, some people have begun to worry about this, but honestly, the way Chip explained the cycle of the planet back in that game, it doesn't seem as though the Chaos Emeralds are explicitly stated to be a part of the process from the beginning, and the Gaia temples which use them to restore the planet aren't said to have been built from the very start either. The Gaia manuscripts, written in an ancient language, seem to date back to around the time of the Ancients, so I'm willing to hedge my bets that the power of the Chaos Emeralds was simply used to help sway that battle in Light Gaia's favor. Still, that's only speculation. I think it's probably safe to say that this could stand to be a little more ambiguous. Anyway, on their way back through space though, they came across the Earth, and were basically pulled to it because the Chaos Emeralds had a reaction to the presence of the Master Emerald, which was already alone and undiscovered there. The Ancients then built up their civilization on the Starfall Islands, and resided there for many years. In this time, they built cyberspace, a digital construct meant to contain their intentions, their histories, and their memories within itself. Even centuries after their deaths, their wills echo infinitely out into the world they left behind, if only to the people who discover them and the remnants of themselves that they have imparted. Still, despite this period of thriving, they cannot escape their foe. They are followed to the Earth and prepare themselves to combat it head-on, while another smaller group of them plan to flee to where the Master Emerald is with the Chaos Emeralds should their plan fail. In previous boss encounters, we got a look at some mysterious out-of-context dialogue from the Ancients that were apparently associated with the Titans that Sonic fought, and here we get the full context for that. The Titans were themselves powered by the energy of the Emeralds, and were final fail-safe weapons to engage with the threat head-on. Select fighters from the Ancient Society were tasked with doing this, but though they valiantly fought in space, they were ultimately defeated. In a last-ditch effort to save the planet and the lingering remains of their people, one Ancient decided to contain the threat within their own Titan, dying in the process and falling back down through the atmosphere. With their enemy sealed in cyberspace, the remaining few went about their business, only to die out within a century, according to Eggman's research. We will come back to this in a second. Having uncovered all of this and broken the seal, Sonic's friends are able to return to physicality along with Dr. Eggman, but the strain has become far too great for Sonic to even bear. As his corruption overtakes him, he is fully trapped in a state between dimensions, not tangible enough to be physical, not coherent enough to be a memory. Fully, painfully catatonic. Meanwhile, the voice Sonic has been hearing this whole time reveals itself fully to be that antagonistic force, claiming that it, now back to power, will destroy both dimensions and consume all, while Sage panics that there is no way for them to stop it. Sonic's friends, though they had only just returned, have faith in Sonic to defeat the oncoming threat though, and decide to put all of their faith in them. They're all ready to go out and make their own histories, write their own stories, but first, they need to let Sonic be the protagonist of theirs one last time. They join hands, willingly receding back into cyberspace for the time being to stave off Sonic's corruption, and as he returns to lucidity, promising to end this for good, Sage becomes enthused. She tells Eggman that though his chances of survival when the Ancient's enemy awakens are nil, the chances have increased with the possibility of collaboration with Sonic. Eggman doesn't really want to work with Sonic, of course, but he finally bites his tongue and agrees to take what he can get. And before we can move on into the final island, can we just talk about all of this for a second? So yeah, okay, I'll be the first to admit, I kinda groaned a little when the aliens angle was trotted back out. I realized that Sonic has been doing this for a while, and maybe I should have just gotten used to it, especially after that's how they decided to resolve all of the bits of Shadow's lore that needed explaining after Adventure 2, but I am a little tired of this as an explanation for whatever's weird and mystical. Defies our understanding? Must be aliens! But that aside, I think there is a lot here worth thinking about now that we have the story right in front of us, because if you haven't been keeping track, Sonic lore is kinda deep if you go digging. Beyond just the insane amount of implications and ties to other canon material featured in things like Gerald's research in the Japanese Sonic Adventure 2 guidebook, there are so many little things and pieces scattered across this series that my brain was buzzing when I got to this. And though I may be proven full of it at a later date, I kinda want to touch on all of this for a minute. So, okay, we know the Ancients are tied heavily to the Chaos Emeralds and Angel Island. We know where the last traces of them went after they lost their battle. And we also know that they're apparently genetic relatives of Chaos. Eggman says their DNA sort of corroded over the years, becoming nigh unrecognizable. As stated by Sonic Channel and the Sonic Adventure Navigation Guide, Chaos was himself a Chao at one point, mutated from prolonged exposure to the Master Emerald. This seems to imply to me that the remaining Ancients' lineage are now what we know as Chao in Sonic's universe, and the one who became Chaos would take on a similar form to his distant ancestors when imbued with Chaos energy. Furthermore though, we also know from Gerald's journals in Sonic Battle that there were once 4 great civilizations which existed thousands of years prior to his time, which he suspects were related to the creation of the Gizoid, which, if you'll recall, are the types of robots that Emerald, and later Gmerald, are. The resemblance between Emerald and Chaos is pretty uncanny, being completely honest with you, and considering it is a defensive weapon built to learn from the strongest person around itself, who is also powered and trained to become more sentient via the power of the Chaos Emeralds, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Gizoids were worked on by people with an intimate understanding of how these things worked. Obviously, the Gizoids were given a canon origin in Sonic Chronicles for DS, but as we know from the recent Sonic Encyclopedia, which reflects a lot of Sega's current stances on canon material, that game is officially not canon anymore, which gets me thinking even more about this. So imagine, if you will, a society that builds a robot to learn from and guard them, and this being so long ago. Pray tell, who was even advanced enough to be making stuff like this back then? Probably not the echidnas. They did have their own impressive architecture and inventions, but as far as tech goes, they didn't seem particularly privy to it. Knuckles himself has always been a layman when it comes to anything remotely technology related. Yet given what we've seen of the Ancients and the off-world tech they brought with them, it's not hard to imagine they could do it. And given its appearance, well, it would bear a striking resemblance, which also isn't hard to imagine. I mean, why not make your robot look like you, right? Gerald's journals confirm his fears, too, having discovered tablets along with the Gizoid, which says that when it learned all it could, it became overwhelmed with knowledge and began to attack, wiping out the remainders of one of the 4 great civilizations responsible for building it. Considering that the Ancients were thinning out during their attack, and a small group is all that migrated to Angel Island, well, I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. I wonder if some groups that spread out would eventually turn into the Chow, leading into the creation of Chaos and the conflict between him and the Echidnas that would kickstart the events of Sonic Adventure much later, and the others created the Gizoid, wiped out by their own creation, which was later discovered by Gerald Robotnik. Gerald, who studied both the Gizoid and Angel Island itself, came to create things like the Bio-Lizard, seemingly modeled after the mural of perfect chaos, the artificial chaos, seemingly inspired by the Ancients themselves or otherwise the Gizoid, and of course Shadow the Hedgehog, who bears a striking resemblance to the prophetic painting of Supersonic, predicting the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles in the Hidden Palace. I don't know, again, I could be off base with some of this, but I think it's really cool to follow these threads through based on stuff we've already gotten to try to make the Sonic world all a bit more cohesive and interesting to speculate about. Let me know what you think about all of this down below, Sonic lore heads. But anyway, we should probably get back to the final island now, shouldn't we? I promise that all the stuff I just mentioned still ties back into the themes I want to talk about later too, by the way. Like, it doesn't hinge on them, but I think the weight helps build it up a bit, you know what I mean? Just trust me. Anyway, let's get talking about OURANOS Island, shall we? The final island is named after the father of the Titans and personification of the heavens, which I guess fits because, it's just a segmented part of KRONOS. No, seriously, I guess they ran out of dev time because this place is practically exactly the same looking. Even has the same style memory tokens as on KRONOS. You just use them to talk to Sage now instead of Amy. The game's data has some unused lines suggesting that this section originally took place on the Ancients' own ruined spaceship, which would have been sick as hell, but it wouldn't really be a Sonic game if some ambitious part of it didn't get axed for time, now would it? Oh well, this place isn't so bad, all said, even if it's a bit underwhelming after all the build-up. For what it's worth, there's actually very little story here until the final encounter either. There's plenty of side story scenes with Sage, just like with Sonic's friends in the previous one, but most of these are basically dedicated to further spelling out the lore of the Ancients themselves and making it a bit more digestible. I'm gonna be honest, I think most of these are pretty unnecessary and seem to be a bit handholdy. I guess they may have been worried that some smaller kids wouldn't get it, but I don't know, this seems just a wee bit patronizing. Still, we do get a little bit more building about what spots were sacred to them and their general purposes, which is neat, and Sage also explicitly states that they made the Chaos Emeralds here, so that pretty much closes the book on that debate. This island is honestly a lot more stingy with memory tokens, so while the platforming challenges are still pretty good, and there are actually quite a few I found pretty inventive, by this point in the game there's a likelihood that you're going to start feeling a little exhausted. Which is a shame because the cyberspace stages here are actually quite a bit better than a lot of the previous ones. The 2D ones still mostly suck, but the ones that crib from the level design of the adventure games tend to work a bit better with Sonic's cyberspace physics in my opinion, and they even let you have a cool skateboard run for the last one, which is neat. Still though, if you've used that accursed slot machine to build up a lot of purple coins here, you can use a fishing spot to pretty much break the game over your knee at this point, which I promptly did for this playthrough. I maxed out my speed to level 99 and even got both my attack and defense pretty darn close. Here's a recommendation, by the way: don't do that for your attack. You'll see why in a bit. Still, being in control of Sonic's max movement potential really made him even more of a blast to control, gotta say. Traversing around the last island was awesome, and I had a lot of fun with it. Making good use of my fast travel, my maxed out potential for grind rail jumps, drop dashes, etc., it was all a really fun time that made getting from place to place feel great. And it helps that there wasn't as much weird segmenting as there was on Chaos Island. Still though, after another hearty emerald hunt and a bit of time where you can finally have Sonic and Sage working together, talking about the island's history with each other, we come upon the final gauntlet. After one more hacking minigame to open a guarded temple door, Sonic obtains Emerald number 6 with very little time left on the clock. Thankfully, Eggman comes along just then to deliver the last one, which, though it surprises Sonic, clearly makes him grateful. Smirking to himself and asking why he would ever want to disappoint Eggman, he transforms into Supersonic and goes off to face the final Titan with the essence of the Ancients' enemy trapped inside of it, Supreme. This battle is piss easy. Seriously, while it does play the game's main theme, I'm Here, which is a bop, this is easily the easiest Titan fight in the game, which, while still visually cool and worth it for the music and vibe alone, is pretty anticlimactic compared to the rest. This is why I said not to level your attack power so much, by the way. On my first playthrough at least, you know, it took me a minute or two to beat him, but with my attack almost maxed out, not even maxed out, a few good smacks sent his health hurtling down to his final attack phase within less than a minute. If you want this guy to even present the slimmest of challenges, just stay underleveled. Trust me. That kinda sucks, but what can you do? Even Sonic's like, wait, that's it? Still though, that's not it. Sage is quick to inform Eggman that this just means the threat has been chased out of the shell it was contained in, and that the only hope they have of saving the planet from annihilation now is for her and Sonic to team up, which she seems to imply will not end well for her. Eggman, clearly grief-stricken by the suggestion, also understands the gravity of the situation. He can't tell her not to go, so he lets her. And you can actually hear him choking up, man. Mike Pollock, dude. What a talent. Sage herself now takes control of the Empty Supreme, literally getting in the robot, in case you thought those Evangelion parallels weren't solid enough yet.
Defeat the moon, Sonic, or Sage will have to pilot the Ava again.
Flying off together, the stage is set for our final confrontation. This large eldritch moon thing is both the enemy of the ancients and the voice we've been hearing since the start, and its name is simply The End. Sonic, using the power of the emeralds the ancients made, and Sage piloting the vessel of their final hopes, barrel toward it, determined to put a stop to this once and for all, as Sonic begs for the ancients to lend them his strength, to prevent this thing from taking more lives, more homes, all over again. If you play the game on easy or normal, you actually don't even get a boss fight here, you just get a quicktime event, which, yeah, that kinda stinks. And the actual boss encounter, which you get by playing on hard, is, well, it's basically just an enhanced version of the hacking minigame. Yeah, when I got to this for the first time, I'll admit, I wasn't very impressed with this. It's a sudden gameplay shift away from the bombastic battles that the game did so well with before, and even if the hacking minigames were being used to prepare you for this moment, it still feels a little cheap to have this style be the final boss. However, over time, I've actually come around on it a little more, in no small part due to two specific factors. For one, this fight is actually pretty damn tough. And for that reason, it's a lot more climactic than Supreme, at least. Here's where the insane Ikaruga bullet patterns start to resemble less Galaga than they do embodiment of Scarlet Devil. Toho just keeps cropping up in my life. Where's my proof, you say? I'm stretching, you say? Well, genius, take a listen to Hermit and Elder Coco's theme music. Well, guess what? That's right! I'm not crazy!
I'm joking, of course.
The second thing is, my god, this thing's monologue. Yeah, the boss talks down to you all throughout, and not only does it make the ongoing struggle, along with the frankly kick-ass music, feel even more powerful, because you're fighting against this thing and its beliefs with everything you've got, but if it weren't for this monologue, I don't think I'd have been able to figure out so clearly what I think the thematic purpose of this encounter was, or what I think the end says about the game's overall narrative, within the context of everything that's built to it. Let's listen to that monologue, shall we? And I'll go ahead and do you the courtesy of subtitling it, since Sonic Team didn't bother to.
Mortal, you have served your purpose. Now face your end. I am the all-consuming void. What can one mote of golden light illuminate within the abyss?
Countless stars, countless worlds, countless lives, all fell to me, all brought to nothing. All the teeming chaos of creation brought to order, to neutrality, to nothing. I saw your mind as you ran through my prison. You have fought machines and gods. They were mighty. They were finite. I am infinite. I am nothing. You struggle as so many have done before. You will be consumed like all those before you. I saw your mind. Your courage never wavered. Why? Arrogance, ignorance, stupidity. I was contained once. Once. Is that why? My captors bent time and space. My captors built a whole reality to contain me. My captors burn their souls away to fuel their engines. And you?
You glitter. You fly about me like a gnat. I am inevitable. I cannot be denied. You strike this incarnation with all your might. It changes nothing. You are not brave. You are not victorious. No matter what form I take, the end comes for you all.
Still, Sonic and Sage keep on pushing. They hit it with everything they've got. It tries to fire a large laser at them, but their combined power knocks it away. In the split second where it's left prone, Sage uses Supreme to chuck Super Sonic through it, reflecting how he was chucked by Giganto at the beginning of the game, but in a moment of teamwork. It's very beautiful, and it obliterates its vessel. In the last moment, it tries to take Sonic with it in its explosion, but sadly, if predictably, Sage knocks Sonic out of the way, confliction on her face as she flies into the explosion along with Supreme, sacrificing herself to save the day, as she asks Sonic to please
look after Father.
Though the day is saved and Sonic returns to the side of his friends, Eggman overlooks the cliffs, the stars literally falling overhead as he reaches out a hand to the sky, before letting it fall by his side and gently clasp. During the first roll of the credits, we get the song Dear Father, sung from Sage's perspective to Eggman himself, and God, break out the tissues for this one if you haven't already, because if you don't, you're not going to be ready for it.
I know now that love is beautiful. I know now the reason why these tears fall from my eyes. This is goodbye. I'm happy to have been your creation, to have been your child.
This really hits hard. And I do kind of wish Sonic reacted to it a bit more, but man, the narrative really did some fantastic work with both Sage and Eggman here, and added a lot of depth to his character that I did not expect to see in the process. This is why I think some of those memos should have been mandatory, though. These moments just hit so much better when you see the way Eggman's opinion of her and attachment to her shifts along with their time together. If you get here without obtaining any of those memos, you're probably going to be left with some questions about how this development came about. I don't think it's impossible to see, of course. There are hints peppered throughout their other scenes together, but the impact is made so much better and more heavy if you've gotten that additional context, especially regarding his thoughts on Maria and the general lack of familial affection in his life. It makes sense why Eggman would then start to really attach to the idea of fatherhood and why this would hit him so hard. Anywho, Sonic and friends gather together after the first credits roll to resolve to have greater adventures. Everyone reinforces their drive to go out and make their own mark, and they all fly into the sunset together. After the second credits roll, we see Eggman in one of the temples, typing away while seemingly trying to put the finishing touches on something. When he finishes, he taps the keyboard, the ancient symbol associated with each scene of the Coco's soul's passing appearing. As Sage's voice stirs, calling for her father, and Eggman affirming, "That's my girl," as Sonic Frontiers comes to its close. And wow, now we can really start to pull this whole picture together, can't we? Because this right here, in microcosm, perfectly reflects what I think this game is all about. All throughout this story, we've gotten a pretty key thing emphasized to us over and over again. The idea of death and rebirth. Civilizations rise and fall, people live and die. Yet even when we disappear from this earth, even when our traditions erode and the context of our lives is lost, our history is somewhere. And for those who preserve it, they carry us into the future, in a way that, if maintained, can never be truly erased. The ancients land on Sonic's planet so far back that their history is largely ignored until rediscovered, yet they're responsible for so much that has come about in the life of Sonic and his friends without even realizing it. Their emeralds became the miracle makers that would save this planet from catastrophe again and again. Their technology would trickle its way into other places, namely Angel Island, and make way for both great conflict and new life. Chaos, the Chow, and even potentially the Gizoid, these are all things that have made sizable impacts on the world and around them, and they come from a common origin. Gerald Robotnik would have never been able to make Shadow if not for the research he did into the phenomena of Angel Island. If it weren't for the Chaos Emeralds, Dark Gaia may have won over Light Gaia thousands of years ago, and there wouldn't even be a planet anymore.
Suffice it to say, Eggman may have been selling their accomplishments short when he said their influence didn't reach the world beyond Starfall. It reached everywhere, and that's the thing. We live, and we die. Our history sometimes is erased, and though we must try our best to maintain it, to impart it to the people who may learn from it in the future, we leave traces all around us, in big ways and small. We echo infinitely into a world that doesn't know we exist. And we plant pieces of ourselves, weaving them into the fabric of it so that even if nobody remembers us, we will confidently be able to say, I'm here. So then what exactly is the end in all of this? Simply put, narratively, I think the end is death. Now, not literally. I don't think the end within Sonic's universe actually materially represents the concept of death, at least maybe. But functionally, that's the purpose I think it's supposed to serve. Think back to its monologue. I don't think it's just sizing itself up because it's the newest, greatest baddie. It talks about its infinite nature, about how even something incredibly mighty remains finite in its vision. It even states that no matter how Sonic and Sage, quote, strike this incarnation, it changes nothing. That's such particular wording, isn't it? This incarnation. It makes it sound as though the moon we see really is just a vessel. It's a container that houses the concept of the end. For all we know, it may always exist in some fashion, some permanent fixture of the world, just like the concept it embodies. And for a game that focuses so squarely on the legacy we leave behind, the traces of ourselves which carry over, whether into the Coco, into Chaos, or even just the ruins of Starfall itself, the memories of cyberspace which can be shared with and understood by people thousands of years removed from the ancients, I think it's very telling that the enemy, the antagonist, is something that so coldly and bluntly speaks to the fear of eternal, irrelevant silence. Death is the great equalizer, as they say, and there's always this anxiety that lives at the heart of all of us, that says that once death comes, nothing else matters, that we'll be forgotten, that the impact we make on the world will, in due time, disappear along with us. But that's not always true, is it? We glitter, we echo, and we burn our image with a brilliant golden light into the world we live and die in. Even if nobody remembers our name, we will etch ourselves in one way or another into the places we inhabit. Whether our dust joins with the earth or whether we make less abstract contributions that people will remember, like art, music, or even video games. And Sonic himself has proven that, hasn't he? Just look at his friends. He's inspired a countless amount of people within his world. It's the reason that they can stand up on their own. Through making and continuing to make his mark, he's inspired them to do the same. For Amy, who wants to share the love she cultivated through her admiration of Sonic. For Tails, who wants to adventure onward and make a difference in people's lives due to the courage he gained from working with Sonic and becoming his equal. And for Knuckles, who was shown the world around him by Sonic and given a wanderlust that he's only now allowing himself to pursue. They too will make their impacts, their own special touches, that will no doubt make the world a better place when they leave it than it was before they got there. Heck, even Eggman learned things through his encounters with Sonic, and though a lot of what he made is questionable at best, he also made Sage. And as if to definitively reject the end's notion that all is forgotten, that all is meaningless, even after death, the scraps of herself that can be pulled back together are an eternal reminder that she was alive, that she is her father's child. Whether she continues to appear in the future, or this is just a construct of cyberspace. I don't know, I think that last reading may be a bit too much for my emotions to handle, frankly, so I'm hoping she's all good, even if she's perhaps not exactly the same Sage anymore. But even so, what a powerful statement, right? Her echo remains. Sage proved this better than anyone else. Along with Sonic, she proved that while the end may come for all of us, there will always be others who start new beginnings, and they'll carry our flames onward with them. We will always exist in some small way through the impacts we make and the efforts of those we inspire. So we die. So what? In a way, we will always be here. And that's what I think Sonic Frontiers is all about. Don't get me wrong, lovely narrative or not, it's not as if this game doesn't have any problems. I've mentioned quite a few of them, and though the final part of the game is absolutely superbly thematically resonant, it certainly has flaws in the gameplay department that prevent this stuff from shining as brightly as it potentially could. Like any great Sonic game, its execution doesn't always live up to its ambition, but between the amount of fun I had, the heart I felt, and the validation I received for caring about this world, these characters, and the storytelling of Sonic games, yeah, I'm pretty darn contented. I'm excited as hell to see what Sonic Team wants to do in the future, and given that the final credits song, One Way Dream, is said to have lyrics that reflect their own feelings about said future,
I can say with some amount of certainty that right now, I've never been happier for them and prouder of them. I sincerely hope the office is beaming with hope and optimism right now because they put a damn good foot forward, and I think they can definitely continue to capitalize on that momentum, even if they have a little bit of trouble programming momentum. It's no secret that being a Sonic fan is a little scary at all times. We've gotten a lot to get excited over these past few years, but we've also had quite a few things hit us with disappointment too, and I'm not going to pretend those aren't worth raising an eyebrow over. Sonic Team has done me dirty before. I don't think I'll be lucky enough to go without seeing them do it again before my lifetime's over. But I do think that they are absolutely trying now, and their attempts are incredibly solid. I think that speaks to more drive and passion than they ever could have claimed to have for something like Forces. Not to get too cheesy, but I think the themes of this game really feed into their journey too, honestly. The Sonic franchise has already cemented itself in the halls of video game history, but more and more it's met resistance from those who would insist its failures are reason to forget all it has going for it. But we know better. There's a reason that Sonic persists, even when many others in his shoes would have become irrelevant and fell by the wayside of mascot purgatory a long time ago. There is something universal there, something resonant that burns brightly and refuses to be snuffed out. As with all new things in this series, Frontiers was something of a gamble, and it may not have been a jackpot, but it was certainly a better winning than we've had in a while. And for me, that bodes well. I know many have been burned too many times to be excited anymore, and I understand that. But the unpredictability of Sonic the Hedgehog has always been one of its paradoxical weaknesses and strengths to me simultaneously. There's no way of knowing how things will ultimately shake out, but we've got to head out there and see what happens anyway. If this game is anything to go by, I think the new frontier is looking pretty promising. But the only way we'll find out is by getting out there and seeing it for ourselves, one step at a time. So let's live that one-way dream, shall we? And when it ends, if it ends, I'll be happy to keep its memory alive, one way or another.
The skies ahead are vast and clear.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for watching my emotional breakdown in the form of a Sonic Frontiers review/story analysis. Working on this has actually been quite fun. It's been a nice change of pace to do something that, isn't the biggest thing I've ever made, and I just love this game, so, I'm eating good. Obviously, if you want to support the creation of my videos, you could start by please commenting on the video and maybe sharing it around and subscribing if you haven't already. That does seriously help a lot. You can also head over to my Patreon below or become a channel member. Each option has its perks. Or you can use Ko-fi for one-time donations if you prefer. I have social media, but maybe look around for my links to others in case one of them explodes or something, I don't know. They're all linked in the description too, and now I'd like to thank some of my patrons specifically, those being Serena Midori, Shogun DX, Friend of Dracula, Ali Oliver, and Claire Meeboon. Thanks again for watching. I'll hopefully see you guys one more time before the end of the year for that late Halloween video, but we'll see how it goes, and as always, peace.
Stronger than